Welcome back to NC State Dendrology. So here is another oak that I'm teaching, and I've actually I'm shooting all these videos at Umstead today, and now I'm in one of the lowest parts of the park. I filmed the blackjack oak and chestnut oak up in one of the high portions of the park with dry rocky soil. Now I'm down in a bottomland floodplain area to teach you Shumard oak, Quercus shumardii. And I'm a little bit sad because this is a really beautiful and special tree that was a double-trunked specimen that we saw actually last year in class, and one of the trunks is split. Last year when I came to scout it out, there were a couple of baby squirrels that were in the trunk, and so it was hollow, and I guess in one of the recent storms it came over. It still has some green leaves, and I guess the silver lining here is that I can show you some of the sun leaves. So this is Quercus shumardii. This is not that common of an oak to see in the landscape. When you see it in the forest, it will be in a bottomland forest or a very wet area. So I'm down here in a bottomland at Umstead, but it is also planted, and actually a couple books that I read said overplanted. Remember that a lot of those bottomland hardwood species can tolerate flooding, and so that also means that they can tolerate soil compaction, and so you often see that these wetland species of trees do fairly well in urban environments. So anyway, so I have half the tree lying on the ground, which, you know, it still has a whole nother life, right? Once trees come down, they live at least as long. The tree itself isn't alive, but it provides lots of food and wildlife habitat for decomposers and also things like salamanders, so it's not a total loss. And I'm going to turn this just a little bit so you can see the bark of this tree, which we can now see lying down. So this is a red oak, and it looks a lot like Quercus rubra in many ways. This is one where it's really easy to mix up with Quercus rubra because it is very similar. It does have ski trails, but not nearly as prominent as Quercus rubra. The habitat is also different, this being found in a bottomland hardwood forest, which is very wet. So I want to show you the leaves first. So you can look at this and see, we're going to learn Quercus rubra this semester. The leaves are pretty wide, and they're similar to Quercus rubra, but they're a lot more divided. Another tree that you're going to learn in this week's lab is Quercus coccinea, scarlet oak, and it also has pretty divided leaves, but more divided than this one, right? So it has these lobes that are distributed. The shape of the leaf itself, if you connected the tips all the way around, is almost orbicular or oval in shape. And Shumard oak is special. It's got some very specific ways to tell it apart from other species. So one of it is that if you look at the lobes, the tips of the lobes, they are very bristled. So these are like more bristle tips than we would see in Quercus rubra or Quercus coccinea. See how many points there are and how many bristle tips. So that's one thing. It's also divided more than Quercus rubra. So the sinuses curve in farther. But unlike Quercus coccinea, which has big C-shaped sinuses, right? Remember, the sinus is that space in between the lobes. This one has got almost overlapping sinuses. So if I put this leaf, if I flatten it out, you can see where those lobes are almost overlapping. So that's a unique trait for Quercus shumardii. And then the last thing I'm going to show you is the leaf base. So the leaf base is what I would call truncate or flat. It's often tapered down here. The lobes are small, but that truncate or flattened leaf base is something that I think of when I think of Quercus shumardii. So when you're practicing your species identification, right, Quercus shumardii is fairly wide. The lobes go deep. Those sinuses, the lobes can overlap, but not always. And another thing for Quercus shumardii, this is a really good character, is to see, you can see the fuzzy, there's actually like a lot of fuzziness in the axils of the veins, and so that's a really important character to know it by. That will also, there's a little bit of that in Quercus coccinea, but not nearly as much. If you look at the acorns, they are also what I would call intermediate between Quercus rubra and Quercus coccinea. So remember, we haven't learned Quercus rubra yet, but we always teach it as it looks like a very fat, large acorn with a little tiny shallow cap on top. almost like a person with a very round face wearing a beret. And then Quercus coccinea, right, has a longer, you know, the cap comes down much farther and has these overlapping scales. So here for Quercus shumardii, you've got kind of an intermediate of the two, right? It's a shallow acorn cap, but it's not as shallow as Quercus rubra, but it's shallower than Quercus coccinea, if that makes sense. So you've got this very prominent acorn cap. It's not super flat, not as flat as Quercus rubra is, but it's somewhat flat. It's not as triangular as Quercus coccinea. Shumard oak is not commonly harvested for wood species, but it is in the white oak family. It does have good wildlife value with these acorns, not as good as the white oaks. And the wood use is, you know, when it is harvested, although it's not that widespread, it is used for flooring and other red oak uses. Remember, red oak does not have tyloses, so it is not used for barrel making unless you need something for dry storage. So I think that's everything I have to tell you about Quercus shumardii. You see this planted a lot, even on campus, so it's something to look for. And again, just get a good sense of those leaves with the multiple bristle tips, the deep sinuses where the lobes almost overlap, right? And that flattened leaf base and just the general overall shape. So that's Quercus shumardii.